Okay, so let's go live. I just want to remind everyone, if anyone had the chance to look at the video I took actually after the class last week of the Bati Rand and the next Chatzar afterwards, which that's literally an excellent example of what we're learning about the courtyards that lead into the alleyway and all the laws that are connected to that. So to give an understanding of what we're talking about, so we're gonna before we continue in the law, I just want to say that after some research on my side, and Rebecca also spoke to some rabbis in New York, I'm assuming. So just to explain how it works, the Eiruv Chatzeiros, how it works, how it works nowadays, and how does it work when there's an Eruv in the city. So there's two separate things. Like Aaron was asking last week about people who make their own private kind of, in their on their line of houses or other things, groups that would get together, apartments or houses, and they make a string around, so they're kind of privatizing a certain specific area so that it should be communal for everyone to be able to carry around, let's say, the brownstone houses, let's say the beginning of the block, the end of the block, etc. So there's two things just to clarify again that we spoke about last week. One thing is to remind ourselves what we learned in the beginning of the laws of Shabbos. The laws of Shabbos include 39 different melachas, things that you are not, things that we learned from the Mishkan, that whatever they did in the Mishkan as far as creating the Mishkan, cooking in the Mishkan, baking in the Mishkan, chopping in the Mishkan, building in the Mishkan, riding in the Mishkan, racing, schlepping in the Mishkan, everything that defines what are the 39 things that they did in the Mishkan, and those are the 39 things that we're not allowed to do on Shabbos. The whole tractate of Shabbos and all the Shulchan Aruch and the responses is based on understanding what does it mean to rest on Shabbos, Shamar and Zachar. Zachar is to remember Shabbos, that's the positive. Shamar is the prohibitions of Shabbos. So to know what are the things that are permissible and not permissible, how we're supposed to be sending on Shabbos, what are we supposed to be doing on Shabbos. This is what the tractate of Shabbos deals with in the Shulchan Aruch and all the laws around Shabbos. Separate from that is the laws of Eiruvin. Now, before we get to what an Eiruv is, we have to remind ourselves that the one of the things about Shabbos is that was done in the Mishkan, and we learn it from the Mishkan, is the prohibition of carrying in a public place, which is called the Rishus Harabim, and carrying from a private domain into a public domain. So those are two things. One is to carry more than 4 amas, let's say 6 to 8 feet in a public domain. So you're standing in a public. Now, what we learned before is what is the definition of a public domain is like it was in the desert, meaning to say, just everything again is around the Mishkan and the desert. The desert had 600,000 Jews, male men, and that made it a public space. So there's halachot. The halachot.
One way.
Hold on. So the law, so what we have is we have the public domain, and that was the Mishkan, and that means that, so what a public domain is, as we learned before, is not so simple, because it's very few places today have that many people that make it a public domain. However, the rabbis added to that a karmelis is a place that is public access, and would be like today most of our streets that we have, which could be, if you're in Seattle and you're driving up 65th, it's not a public domain. I mean, it's just not. It doesn't have that many people driving in it, but it's a public space. No, everyone could be there. So it's a public space. Everyone has access to it. It doesn't even have kind of like it's not like nooks and like corner spaces. There's a lot about corner spaces versus straight spaces. Even like, alleyway, is it a straight path, or if you're walking around in zigzag, there's different, that kind of breaks up the public space. But Karmelis is also considered halachically a public domain. Halachically. Hold on, Jonathan, I'll get back to your question in a second. So therefore, the rabbi said, even in a Karmelis, you cannot carry on Shabbos. So which makes it basically means that only a literally private domain you can carry on Shabbos. What makes it a private domain? The halachot tells us private domain would be like your own private space that people live there. It's a private space and it's closed off. So what do? You have walls and you have at least a certain amount of space that makes sure that the public can't get into your private space. Now, so therefore, that's a private domain. In a private domain, halachically, you could carry. There's no problems to carry. What happens? The rabbi said that we can also. What does an Eiruv do? And Jonathan, maybe this is your question, so I'll answer it. What does an Eiruv do? What an Eiruv traditionally should do. Again, I'm not getting into the laws of Eiruv 100%. An Eiruv will make that the Carmelis, which is kind of the rabbis made it into a public domain, should be privatized into private domain. And there's ways of doing it. It doesn't mean that you have to put up a wall, like in the old city of Jerusalem, that has gates that closes at night, and therefore it's like a locked-in space. The rabbis have taught us within the laws of Eruvin that through making a lechi and a kaira, there's different, the whole thing of the every 10 feet, like Aaron says, there's a pole and there's a string. For instance, today we utilize, again, the experts are at this, we utilize electricity wires and poles and put on an lechi, that we turn that into a space that would be to privatize the rabbinically public space. It's, halachically, one can't really privatize a public domain. That was one of the problems that Rav Moshe Feinstein have. No, Reb Jonathan, I don't know the details of the Flatbush. I can't give an opinion on the Flatbush area because I don't know personally the details.
What I'm talking about.
I know there's an Eruv there, but I don't know if there's any question about specifics in the Eruv. I have no knowledge of it. But in general, the question Rav Moshe Feinstein had was, if we can make an Eruv in a hold on, Aaron, if we can make an Eruv in a public domain, and the question is that in the few places in America that have enough traffic to make a biblical public domain would be certain places in Brooklyn, like Ocean Parkway, Eastern Parkway. These are huge streets that have, 6 lanes and service lanes and millions, hundreds of thousands of people driving through it a day. So there's all kind of questions. Does a car break up? There's all kind of questions that, maybe certain streets in Manhattan. There's very few places, most small cities. I don't know if there's any real public domain in a city like Seattle, maybe the I-5. But it's an elevated it's not on the sidewalk. It's not on the street. So that's another thing. But just let's assume we can make an Eruv. Let's not get into questions about which city has an Eruv. Let's assume we can get an Eruv because we're not talking the laws of Eruv. We're trying to figure out the laws of Eiruv Chatzeiros. So the laws of Eruvin is that you're able to privatize the Carmelis. That's what we're talking about. So what happened added to that is when we come into our chapter, where King Solomon. Hold on, we have a concern that because we're giving this idea that people live in communities like gated communities, which is called a chatzer, a courtyard. Like I took a video and we showed in the picture thanks to ChatGPT draw so nicely to show us everyone living together. Again, even if it's a wall, it's all there. King Shlomo said, one second, people are going to forget about the laws of caring. And people are going to forget about that. There's a prohibition of carrying, and maybe they're going to end up carrying in a public domain because they're going to forget that because they mainly live in their courtyard, and there's a lot of these places like this. The video I showed you, the shul is in the courtyard. So it's not like today where you have to leave the courtyard to go to the shul. The shul is in the courtyard, the mikveh is in the courtyard, everything's in the courtyard. So it could be a person could spend every single Shabbos of the year that you never leave the courtyard. Why do you have to leave the courtyard? You have a shul, you have a base medrash, you have your friends, everyone lives in the same courtyard. So maybe that you're never going to end up leaving the courtyard. So Shlomo Melech said, time out. We have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros so people should not forget about the laws of Shabbos. It's a reminder. It's a takana. It's a takana means the rabbis are not making a new law. They're making a reminder that there's the laws of caring. Now, if you have no Eiruv in the city, and you have a chatzer, you have a courtyard, you must make an Eiruv Chatzeiros, or you cannot carry things that are in your home, right? We talked about last week, different levels of privacy, right? Things that are, again, the video that if you would watch that I sent, the people that live in the courtyards here in Jerusalem, they have things that they leave outside their house, like bicycles and chairs, and even maybe their cleaning equipment, and they have things that are inside their house, kelim b'bayis and kelim in the chatzer. So Kalim is utensils that are in the house, like your dishes. A normal person doesn't leave their dishes in their courtyard, even if it's a protected area. They're not scared anyone's going to steal it, but it's your private dishes. So those are called vessels in the house. If you don't have an Eiruv Chatzeiros and you have a chutzner, you cannot carry things from your house into the chutzner, into the courtyard. You could carry your things that are in your courtyard, but not from your house into the courtyard, because you're going from a total private space to a semi-private place. And the same thing applies if you have two courtyards that come together. So if they don't combine a single Eiruv between the two of them, so to carry from one chutzner to the next is one thing. To carry from your house into the second person's chutzner, even if you're not passing a public domain, even if you're not passing an alleyway in between, it's a problem, because there's two levels of privacy. If they don't combine the two courtyards, make one Eiruv Chatzeiros, then they're kind of saying we're two separate courtyards. We have a door in between, but we're two separate courtyards. And there's certain laws that we're going to learn where they have no choice; they have to make a single court, a single Eiruv. Now, on top of all this, how does this come back to our question? That Aaron says he noticed people are putting up strings around, let's say, brownstones. There's two things here, and you have to be very careful of the contradiction of it. What the rabbis did, and I found out in the United States they actually do it through the council, is what they do is they say, one second, if we're putting an Eiruv in, like Jonathan said, Flatbush, or putting an Eiruv in other parts, as Bar Park, I don't know if it's one Eiruv, the whole Brooklyn, or two Eiruvs of them, this maybe they break it up, but let's say a certain area, the city of Jerusalem, has one big Eiruv that's run by the Rabbanut. Right? So they put an Eiruv in. So how do we carry in between apartments? We still didn't take care of the problem of an Eiruv Chatzeiros. It makes no difference that we have an Eiruv to carry. But how am I allowed to take things from my house into the courtyard, which the courtyard in this case is the entire city? So therefore, on behalf of the city, the Rabbanut, the rabbis of the city of Jerusalem, will make an Eiruv Chatzeiros on behalf of everyone. But what do they do in order to do that? In order to do that, what they're doing basically is, and this is what Rebecca found out and I found out from my side, and thank you, Rebecca, for your research, is that this that we have, like I showed you again in the video, we have two courtyards and an alleyway in between. And the alleyway breaks up the courtyards, and they have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros, and they have to make a shituf. You have to also join together in the alleyway. All those ideas are, if you're talking about a whole bunch of courtyards, and how do we combine the courtyards together? Then we have to figure out how do we combine the Eiruv Chatzeiros, or what do we do to combine the courtyards? But what the rabbis did with the big Eiruv was they said there's no whole bunch of courtyards with alleyways, etc. There's one big courtyard. The whole city of Jerusalem is one big courtyard. It's one big courtyard which has a big, imagine a wall around it. It may not be an actual wall. It may be strings. But in the entire city of Jerusalem, it's one courtyard. It's as if everyone lives. All 1 million people live in one courtyard. And therefore, there's one Eiruv Chatzeiros for everyone. And therefore, you can carry anything you want in your house, out of your house. You don't have to make a private Eiruv Chatzeiros between courtyards. Now, no one's stopping you. The only question is, where Aaron's situation comes up, is where a group of people, make a separate Eiruv around their line of houses, right? That's like you said, the brownstones, and it's a city. It's on a street. Let's say in Borough Park or in Flatbush. That's in an Eiruv. So why are you making an Eiruv if you're in an Eiruv? Why do you need a separate Eiruv? If you hold by the Eiruv of Flatbush, why would you make your own Eiruv? So obviously you're saying you don't hold by the Eiruv of Flatbush. So the question is, then, if you have your own Eiruv, are you really separating yourself? It's almost your own courtyard. And then you would have to make your own Eiruv Chatzeiros, possibly. If you're making your own Eiruv, saying that I don't know if there's an Eiruv, if the Eiruv in the whole Brooklyn is good, and therefore I want to have my own strings around my street, then basically you're saying I don't recognize the Eiruv as being one big courtyard. I have my tiny courtyard, and then you can't rely on the fact that some rabbi in Borough Park went to the city council and got because what they do basically is, why do they go to the city council? Because we're going to learn the laws is if you have Gentiles in your courtyard, it's a problem. Or you have people that don't keep Shabbos who are Jewish in your courtyard, it's a problem because they break up the unity. If they're not recognizing the need for Shabbos or not recognizing the need for an Eiruv, they're kind of isolating themselves. Then it's not one single courtyard, and then they're separating it. So what you have to do is get everyone to kind of, even if they're not keeping Shabbos or if they're not Jewish, they kind of sign up and say, we're letting the Jews do whatever they want. So how do you do it in America? You can't go to Bar Park in Brooklyn and ask every single Gentile in Brooklyn to sign a paper and say they agree to the Eiruv Chatzeiros. So what do? They go to the city council and they figured out that the city council has rule, has authority really over everyone's property, and they, on behalf of every person, could say, we say that the Eiruv Chatzeiros works for the whole Borough Park or for the whole Brooklyn. Okay, Jonathan, what was your question? Sorry for the introduction.
All right, I thought I already asked and you already answered. I was just wondering, all right, well, I'll put it this way, right, where the Eruv is constructed, all right, in Flatbush, okay, around Ocean Parkway. So is Ocean Parkway considered a Rishus HaRabban or a Rishus HaYachid?
Again, I can't give an opinion. I don't know the details of how
I
they.
didn't mean to reiterate that, but I thought we already established an answer.
I think I didn't see it inside. I don't like to quote what I heard from someone else because I didn't see the text. And if I would open the text of the Tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein, who again was the Rav. They say that Moshe Feinstein said you can't make an Eruv in Brooklyn because of a street like Ocean Parkway. Ocean Parkway. Right. Again, I didn't see the text. I didn't study it. I'm not coming chas v'shalom to say that you can or cannot carry. There's greater scholars than I that have dealt with the issue. So you have to ask your rabbi about the local rabbi about how there's other things that could break up an Eruv.
Likely to change some of the dynamics of it, but I don't know.
Could also break up an Eruv. It's not so. There's a lot of things that could break up an Eruv. An Eruv is not a simple subject. But we're dealing in our chapter now is assuming there is an Eruv. How do we do an Eiruv Chatzeiros today? So that what we're doing is there's no courtyards. There's one big courtyard. So and the rabbis, whoever it is that you rely on, that has the Eiruv, they also do the Eiruv Chatzeiros. But they're two separate things. You have to remember they're not the same thing. There's an Eiruv Chatzeiros and there's an Eiruv. The Eiruv to carry would be like making it a courtyard, but still you need an Eiruv Chatzeiros on top of that, and that's being done by the rabbi because they say the whole city is one big courtyard, or the whole area in the Eiruv is one big courtyard. Yes, Aaron, then Rebecca.
Okay, sorry for that. So I have a class on Tuesday night. So 2 Tuesday nights in a row, we delved into Moshe Feinstein. I'm not going to get into everything it said because I'm not expert, but my point is every question anyone's going to bring up or that you say you will not talk about is in that in his papers, and you should read it. I mean, it is so good, and even if you follow the Eiruv, which I do, another side to it, and you can answer all these questions. It's so easy to understand. You should just read it. That was my whole point.
Thank you.
If you have these questions, stop asking you, and just get the paper and read it.
Rebecca, next. Thank you, Aaron.
I forgot to ask in the past. Some people here hold that the island of Manhattan is in itself an Eruv. Like, sorry, that somehow that.
Yes, I've heard of that too from a bunch of rabbis. Yeah.
So is that halachically, does that hold any water? That Manhattan itself, because it's an island, the island is an Eruv?
Again, you have to check with the local psak on the again. Like I tell you,
Moshe Feinstein. He'll explain it.
Moshe Feinstein is telling you the laws. We're not talking about the laws. We're talking about the actual. Is there an Eruv in?
No, but he explained. We studied it. It's not just the laws of Brooklyn. It's the laws of New York, the 5 boroughs as well. And he explains it so well. I'm just saying we studied it 2 weeks. We could have gone on for a year, but we only so much time to each topic.
But I just want to know, like, does that make sense that an island would not need an Eruv?
Okay, the idea is that again, what is the idea of the island? What is the idea? It depends how. It depends if you have an island, let's say I don't know, off the middle of nowhere. Do you need an Eruv to make it private? It's a private. What do you need? What's an Eruv? An Eruv makes something private. But if the place that you're making private is itself public, that's its own shaila. Means if the whole island of Manhattan itself is a public domain, so what's it help if there's an Eruv outside the island?
Right.
That's the question.
Okay. Also, So like there's a gated park that's like adjacent to the Eiruv where I live, and like it's like a playground and a gated area that's like right adjacent to the Eiruv. So if my brother brings his kids there and I go meet them there, like can I like pick up one of the kids, like not like walk with them, or I think I'm only allowed to walk like 6 amos carrying something if there's no Eruv. Is that correct? Like I want to know like what are the parameters if in this gated park which is outside of the Eruv?
Okay. So here, so that's very good because that's comes to our shaila here. To carry, if the park is totally gated, means there's like is and 10 tefachim high, not like to your it's high enough to make it.
It's like to your waist kind
Yes,
of.
that's 10 tefachim. So then that's a rishus hayachid. Now, if it's out of the eruv, the problem would be that to carry from your house to take a book from your house to the park is a problem. Why? Because besides the fact that maybe you're leaving the eruv in, even if you're mamish walking through, like we have one chasser to the next, but there's no Eiruv Chatzeiros between the two courtyards. So the public, the
Wait,
city.
but just to make clear, it's city property. It's a public playground. It's not private.
Even if it's public, but if it's gated, then there's an Eruv on it.
Okay, but so you're saying I can't carry anything, let's say, from my apartment into this park, but into the playground. But within the playground, it is okay to carry if it's fully gated?
It could be. I have to check in because if you remember, we discussed this once about public parks. If you could carry in a public park, but here you're talking about public. That's
But here's
totally.
what I heard. If the baby, a baby, so they can't walk. So and you don't believe in a roof in Brooklyn, let's just say, use this example on Ocean Parkway. You can take your baby out. A lot of safaris don't. And when you're having a bris, they have a room for you to sleep in for the whole night so you can have the bris on Shabbos. Okay. But if you're, I don't know the percentage, but if your baby or toddler can walk a certain percentage and they get tired, then you're allowed to pick it up and carry it to
And
your house.
that's another law. It's called the Chaynaisis Atzmei that a live person is carrying is not weight. It's even when you're
Mm-hmm.
it's something that's some people use that to carry even like Aaron says where there's no air. But over here, and if I'm not mistaken, I mean I have to check again. But if I'm not mistaken, there's no reason that the park should not be an Erev. Because if there's a gate, the problem is that the park is an open park. But if there's a closed
No,
park,
so the thing is, it's meant for small kids. So the whole thing is like fully gated because they don't want kids to be able to run in and out.
but that doesn't make a difference why. But if it's gated, then it's gated. That's the end of the story.
Right. So I'm saying there's no openings because they want to keep the kids safe.
Why would
So
you?
so
You
that
can't.
would mean that I
There's
could
no
carry
opening, but
within.
they open it when
Yeah,
they
but you
have to
can't.
y-
get out.
I mean, the door is not.
Yeah.
That's not a problem. That doesn't do anything. Doors are.
Okay.
Every city has a door. That's not a problem. The only problem would be even if, let's say, the area of your area finishes by the gate and there's no parking
Yeah.
space in between. Then, like I said, to take a book. Let's say you wanted to take a book from your house through your courtyard, which is your street, and to walk into the park, that'd be a problem because there's no Erev Chatzeris between your the Erev and the park. But if to carry things in the park, it's a public it's an Erev. I mean, it has a wall around it. It
But
has a-
Yeah.
doesn't Jews have to own it? Because they said in when they make the A roof, even where my parents live, there's an A roof. It totally is an A roof. There's no question. But you have to own it. So they like give $1, $2, whatever. They're allowed to put the strings and whatever it is.
Okay, that's already as I said, it's details. I don't want to say 100%, and it could be right about that. But I mean, halachically, that would be so that it's something to do with you, not just that you're private. Because the problem is making a wall like in a park is also like doing it in a bika, that's a public place where you put up walls, and let's say you're traveling. We'll get to that. We'll get to
But
that. I'm gonna
how tall did you say the wall, like the gate has to be for it to be considered an Arab?
10 Tvachim, I think you could check online, but 10 Tvachim should be about 30 to 30, 36, 38 inches.
Oh, that's really short. That's no problem.
10 Tvachim is not tall.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's go. Let's start the halacha number 3. So here we're going to talk a little bit like what Rebecca's question is, which is Yashtei Chatzeiros zu lefnu mizu. 2 courtyards, which one is into the next, meaning you would have again in this picture it would be this is not such a good picture, but let's say this courtyard over here, where my arrow is over here. Let's say this was the courtyard, which on this wall you would go out to the street, and then you have an entry between these 2 walls, right? So this is the outer courtyard, this is the inner courtyard. They're both private, meaning to say this is one group of people, this is a second group of people. But the second group of people in this courtyard B, let's call it, in order for them to get into courtyard B, they have to walk through courtyard A. So now the members of courtyard B have to walk through courtyard A from the street to get into their private courtyard. So it's a private courtyard within a private courtyard. So you have this is, let's say, one big courtyard, but there's separate courtyards. It's 2 separate membership, let's say. So now the question is, how does that affect the Eiruv Chatzeiros? Meaning to say, does the people walking through the Eiruv disrupt, even if, let's say, courtyard number A has their own Eiruv Chatzeiros, how does their walking through the courtyard affect Eiruv Chatzeiros is A Eiruv Chatzeiros? And Eiruv Chatzeiros is B Eiruv Chatzeiros. So let's see the law. So Shtei Chatzeiros, you have 2 courtyards. Zu lifanim mizu, one that is behind the other. Ubnei Chatzer Apnimi, the inner courtyard, which we called courtyard A, which is all the way in. Ein lahem derech el rachav. There's no way for them to go to the street. Means, back to the picture. If, for instance, there was a door over here, whatever, over here, each one had their own entry to the street privately. That's something else. So A could go, this is A, so A could go to the street through their entry, and B goes to the street of their entry. But if there's only one entry through B, because B back and deeper into A, so the A is basically disrupting courtyard B's privacy, because for them to get in, they have to walk through courtyard A to get to courtyard B. So he says, or whatever, B is the outer one, A is the inner one. So they don't have their own entry to the street. The inner courtyard has to walk through the outer courtyard to get to the street. But they're private courtyards, they're separate courtyards, not one courtyard. So how did they get in? So there's an entry, there's a door between the 2 courtyards, the inner courtyard and the outer courtyard. And therefore the inner courtyard people go through the outer courtyard and then to the street, and vice versa, to go from the street into the inner courtyard. And if they want to go to the street, they don't have to go to the street. Like I said, you could stay a whole Shabbos in your courtyard. But if they want to go to the street, they obviously have permission to walk through your courtyard to go into the street. Let's say, one courtyard, the inner courtyard is the first courtyard. The second courtyard became a neighborhood later, privatized it, and made it a second courtyard. So the first courtyard says, listen, we were here first. We want to have access to your courtyard. If you want to make a courtyard outside of our courtyard, you can't block up our entry to the street. You're not allowed to stop our entry. So we're letting you know, anytime we want to go to the street, we're going to walk through your courtyard. So that's, let's say, how they do it. So what do they do in order to have, again, it's a Rishus Yachid for sure. There's a wall around it. But how does it work as far as the Eiruv Chatzeiros goes, to permit carrying within the courtyards? So the halachah says they have to make one Eiruv. They say that we're one courtyard. Like I said, Yerushalayim, because again, any city, Brooklyn, Yerushalayim, that if you're going to look at the Eiruv as a whole bunch of courtyards, we have a big problem, because you still can't carry, or you definitely can't carry things from your house, because there's a whole bunch of separate courtyards and you're not making an Eiruv Chatzeiros. So when you make one Eiruv, you're basically saying it's one courtyard. That's what you're saying. So even though technically they're private courtyards, like today, you're still allowed, just because there's an Eiruv Chatzeiros in Brooklyn, if you see someone hanging around your apartment building, the person can't say, well, there's one Eiruv Chatzeiros, and so then it's really one courtyard. So I'm reading a book in your lobby. The people of the apartment building can say, okay, there's a courtyard for certain things, but you can't just sit in my lobby and read a book. Presumably that's the idea, right? Because there's still some level of privacy. So what do? You have to make one Eruv. What happens if they don't make an Eruv together? There's two courtyards, an inner courtyard and an outer courtyard, with one access to the street via the outer courtyard, but they don't make a single Eruv. They make separate Eruvim, which this is what I was talking about with Aaron's case. If the people on Aaron, that Aaron says that have brownstones, and they're making their own Eruv by putting up poles, they're basically saying we're our own courtyard, separate from the general courtyard by making an action. So the question is, are they statement to say that they're not accepting the Eruv or they're separating themselves from the Eruv? Then it could be technically a shtickle problem. So if they don't make a single Eruv, so what happens? So then what's the law? So what happens if they don't make an Eruv together? So if the inner courtyard themselves made an Eruv and the outer courtyard did not make an Eruv, so they could still carry in the inner courtyard. Why? Because nothing's disrupting their courtyard. The people that live in the outer courtyard won't come into their courtyard. They have no reason to be in their courtyard. They have no business. Like I said, you can't just come into my apartment building and sit down in my lobby, even though if we made a courtyard, if we made a single Eruv, which was what every apartment does, so that's something else. But if we didn't make a single Eruv, then my courtyard's private. And the inner courtyard has more privacy than the outer courtyard. That's obviously the agreement that they had when they put up the courtyards. So therefore, the inner courtyard has its own Eruv, and they could carry. The people from the outer courtyard can't carry. They don't have an Eruv. What happens if the outer courtyard has an Eruv, but the inner courtyard didn't make an Eruv? It's not, they didn't do it. And we're walking through the outer courtyard to get into their private courtyard. The Eruv doesn't help. Why? Because the traffic that goes through the outer courtyard breaks the Eruv. So this is where the laws of Eiruv Chatzeiros gets complicated. Means you have a private courtyard, but you're an outer courtyard to an inner courtyard. Now the inner courtyard people did not make an Eruv. So in these two cases, if the inner courtyard made an Eruv and the outer courtyard did not make an Eruv, so that's not a problem. Because the inner courtyard, no traffic is breaking their Eruv, it's their privacy. So they're good. And the outer courtyard is as if they have no Eruv, because they didn't do what Shlomo Melech said to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. But what happens if the outer courtyard makes an Eruv, the inner courtyard does not? So the people that live in the inner courtyard are not people that have an Eiruv Chatzeiros. So by walking through but not even by walking through, but by even having the ability to walk through the outer courtyard, they break the Eruv. So the Eiruv Chatzeiros doesn't help because they didn't make one single Eruv. The question is obviously going to be what happens when they both make an Eruv separately. So if they each make one individually, if the inner courtyard makes an Eruv, they could carry. If the outer courtyard is the only one who makes an Eruv, then no one could carry. Okay, why? Because the inner courtyard has the ability, Drisas Regel means they could walk. They have walking rights through the outer courtyard. Through the outer courtyard, because they have no other way to get to the street. Because again, we're talking about a situation where there is no access to the street from the inner courtyard. They publicize, so to say, they break the Eruv because there's no real privacy for the outer courtyard. People are walking through it. Right? People walking through that's where it becomes complicated. But this is only if the inner courtyard people didn't make an Eruv. So that by them, they're not people that have an Eruv. So they're walking through your Eruv breaks your Eruv. Why? Because their feet, so to say, is a foot that doesn't have the right to carry, and they have the right to walk through your place. So you're trying to privatize a public place. You can't do that. And what happens if the outer courtyard and the inner courtyard both make an Eruv, but they make separate Eruvs, not one Eiruv Chatzeiros together? There's an inner courtyard making an Eruv, they have their own matzahs in the corner, and the other one have their own matzahs with the bracha, with how you make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. They're allowed to carry in their place, in the inner courtyard, but they didn't combine the courtyards. And their feet are permissible to walk in their inner courtyard around because they've made their own private Eiruv Chatzeiros. Then they don't break the Eiruv Chatzeiros. So this is a very interesting law, because if you try to understand it logically, it's not so simple. Why? So you have the two courtyards here, A and B. Okay, let's just keep on changing A and B, but this is the inner, this is the outer, this is the street. So if both of them make their own one Eiruv Chatzeiros, everything's fine. It's one big courtyard, as if this wall doesn't exist, or there's a big entry between the wall. They're one big people, and therefore there's no problem. There's a street and there's a courtyard. That's how we look at it, one courtyard. Now, if they don't make an Eiruv Chatzeiros together, that means they didn't join. So then, if the inner courtyard doesn't have an Eiruv Chatzeiros, then they are people that don't have permission to carry in a chutzner, in a courtyard, because they don't live in the outer courtyard, they live in the inner courtyard, and they didn't do anything to combine the two courtyards. So they're walking through this Eiruv is like as if they're making it a public place. And therefore the Eiruv over here doesn't help for anyone. But if both of them make their own separate Eiruv Chatzeiros, so even though nothing's changed really, they're still walking through your courtyard, and they didn't make a single Eiruv Chatzeiros to make it one big courtyard, but there are people that belong to an Eiruv Chatzeiros in the courtyard. And because of that, he says, Yesh Lam Drisas Rebel Chatzer is Viregel Asur the Kivan Shem Oishim Revealed. I'm aware of Gam Emi Fniatzim, Shaz Mutam Tatum Kaim, Vavli Reg Muters from Kaima, Ainam Oishim Gam Chatzeiros, and doesn't make, they don't break the outer courtyards Eiruv Chatzeiros. V'chein in Bepnimius Ein Dar Rakish Ralekot. What happens if the inner courtyard is not really an inner courtyard? It's just one person's house. One person lives there, only one Jewish person lives there. He has no problem to carry because he's the only person there, only Jewish person there. Again, he's a person that's allowed to carry. He doesn't break the outer courtyard. But if two people live there and they didn't make an Eruv, even if one person only lives in the first courtyard, even the one individual can't carry because his house now is in a public domain because they're breaking it. Okay, this is a complicated law. I'm not sure if there's any footnotes to try to explain it, but what this causes really is where the question comes up in kind of our practical life is if you live in a city that doesn't have an Eruv. Again, you have to remember, if you live in a city that doesn't have an Eruv, like we showed the question last week from Crown Heights, if you don't live in a city with an Eruv and you live in an apartment building, you cannot carry. In the apartment building, there's no Eiruv Chatzeiros. Because that's what Shlomo Melch said. That even if you live in a private domain, you have to have an Eiruv Chatzeiros. Therefore, if you live in an apartment building, they make an Eiruv Chatzeiros, like we learned last week, it's in someone's apartment, that there's an Eiruv Chatzeiros, someone has to have the key, or at least the window has to be open. And like this, everyone can carry in the apartment building. But if you have an apartment building that goes into another apartment building, right, you have to walk through the hallway of one apartment building to get to the next apartment building, which is kind of our case. And there's no general Eruv in the city. Then the question is, did they make an Eiruv Chatzeiros in both buildings around? If they did, then everyone could carry in their own courtyard. But if they didn't make one, and only the inner one made one, the outer one didn't make one, the outer one made one, that inner one did not make one, then the traffic that walks through it breaks the Eruv. It doesn't help that you make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. You have to consult the people from the inner courtyard and see what they're doing. Because if they're not going to join you in an Eiruv Chatzeiros, and they don't have their own Eiruv Chatzeiros, your Eiruv Chatzeiros is not functional. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, when you look at that picture, I'm going to put a wrinkle there. You said when she brought up the park with the gates surrounding it and a door, look at that picture. There's a door. So wouldn't that all be surrounded?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's surrounded.
So the doors, you wouldn't need one in each. It would be as if it was one because of the door.
Listen, even if there's no actual door here, like over here, but if
no, I'm talking about the other picture where there's two courtyards.
This one here?
Yeah. So there's two courtyards. Why the middle considered separating them if there's that door?
Okay, so I just want to say something. As I said, the ChatGPT did a good job, not a great job. This door kind of makes a problem because this door is like one door for both courtyards. So then both courtyards have equal access to the street. Then that's not our case that's not the case of our law now. This picture wouldn't be the case of our law because both courtyards have their own door that goes to the street. But if the door wasn't here, but the door was here, let's say, right, this house was moved to over here, and this is where the door was. And this courtyard had no access to the street. The only way for them to go to the street was to walk through the courtyard. There's obviously an entrance in between this wall. So their foot traffic through the outer courtyard breaks the Eiruv Chatzeiros if they don't have an Eiruv Chatzeiros. Well, again, this seems complicated, but there's a lot of apartment buildings, let's say in Long Island, not in Coney Island, right? Those big complexes, and you walk through one apartment building to go to the next apartment building. That's foot traffic through one apartment building. And if apartment building A has an Eiruv Chatzeiros and apartment building B does not, the foot traffic breaks the Eiruv Chatzeiros and doesn't help that you have an Eiruv Chatzeiros. And if there's no Eiruv around the whole Coney Island, you can't carry. If there's more than one Jew living in courtyard number in the inner courtyard. Okay, let's see the footnotes over here. So again, it's not so simple. I was considering not learning this chapter, but
No, thank you for doing it.
I think we'll figure this one out. So what did we say over here? They are permitted to carry in their own courtyard, and the tenant of the outer courtyard are forbidden. Why? Because they did not make an Eruv. So if you don't make an Eruv, so you can't carry. So the inner courtyard is inner. So there's no reason for the people from the outer courtyard to walk into their courtyard. So therefore it doesn't break. Now, in the laws of Rambam, it gets so complicated because they talk about scenarios of, 5 courtyards. 5 courtyards where there's where you're walking through one to the next, to the next, to the next. So, and then then there's the last courtyard. So how all that traffic breaks up the different courtyards, and this goes the whole kind of laws about courtyards, not just the laws of Eruv, also the laws of joint access to things like rivers and water sources. There's all kind of questions in the laws of all this. Okay, the footnotes is not going to give us too much help in this one, so we're going to have to take the information that we've had so far to imagine what's going on. Basically, what we could learn from this law so far, and we're going to continue the next law to give us more information, which is that even if you have an Eiruv Chatzeiros, it means you yourself, your group of people got together and put together and said, we're one group and we're together. If there's permissible foot traffic that has to go through your courtyard to get to their courtyard because they have no access to the street, so then you're it's like literally living on the street, and living on the street doesn't help because you're as if you're in a public domain, and they're in this case breaking your Eiruv. So you have to work out with the inner courtyard, either make sure they make their own Eiruv Chatzeiros, or to make a joint Eiruv Chatzeiros. But if you're not going to do that, then they're going to break your Eiruv Chatzeiros. Now he doesn't explain. He doesn't go again. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch kind of wants to be very, very basic in what he's talking about in these laws. So he doesn't explain that. He says that if both of them do their own Eiruv Chatzeiros, then it's allowed. Why? He says because you're a person that's, it's as if let's say what kind of shirt you wear. So if you belong to inner courtyard A that has an Eiruv Chatzeiros, so then you're called a private person. So you have a white shirt. If you live in inner courtyard A and there's no Eiruv Chatzeiros, so you're wearing a blue shirt, or you're a public person. So you're like a walking public person, and you're walking through their courtyard is like public walking through, and therefore publicizes it breaks the Eiruv, the Eiruv. Why? What's the logic behind it? Because why is there the whole law of Eiruv Chatzeiros? In theory, we don't need an Eiruv Chatzeiros. These are all private domains with courtyards, with walls around it. Why are we making people problems? The problem is because Shlomo Melech said no. If you don't make an Eiruv Chatzeiros, people are going to forget about the laws of Shabbos. So therefore, Shlomo Melech's takana, that's why a takana, when the rabbis institute something, so you have to look at why they instituted it. And you look at it from that perspective. Shlomo Melech looks at people that are not making an Eruv as if they are an entity of forgetfulness of Shabbos. And if they have passage through your courtyard, that's bringing a forgetfulness of Shabbos into your courtyard. And therefore, it doesn't help that you made it an Eiruv Chatzeiros because there's still a forgetfulness in your courtyard because they have access to your courtyard. because that's why takanas are sometimes more complicated. When the rabbis institute something, it's called a takana. They're more complicated than a straight up law in the Torah. Because a straight up law in the Torah is easy to define. A takana, you have to the word takana comes from the root of a takana is a concern. When we're concerned about something. So when you're concerned about something, you have to always ask yourself, have we addressed the concern? If we didn't address the concern still remains. So if the concern of King Solomon was a forgetfulness of Shabbos, the fact that there's the people that are possibly going to forget about Shabbos because they didn't make an Eiruv Chatzeiros are passing through your courtyard, that concern remains in your courtyard as well. Your courtyard is a courtyard of concern because people that have access to your courtyard are maybe forgetful about Shabbos. That's why, again, the rabbi's takana is much more complicated. It's much more complicated to get a handle on what the rabbis meant when they instituted certain restrictions and takanas is because a lot of it is about concern base. So the question is, when did we address the concern? Again, concern means that it's not straight up right, it's not black and white. There's a concern of confusion. So how sure are we that we address the concern? And that's why these laws become very complicated. Okay, let's do one more law. In Yiddish, she writes shtok. Shtok means one flight up. Ganig. They have a public porch. So you have houses that they have downstairs, like a what do they call it? A double house, one on top of the next. What do they call it in English? Second story houses. Okay. So the second story
brownstone townhouse, brownstone.
Brownstone like straight. I'm talking about when you
basically have I think it's called like a walk up.
Okay, walk up. So let's say you have a house. Condo. Let's say a condo. Condo would be a
townhouse.
Townhouse would be a good example where you have 2 floors and the upper condo has its own porch. Right? I think Rebecca was saying, or Aaron was talking about. Aaron, you were saying last week that in the apartment building, different floors have different access. Like we're all on the same floor. We have access to the same garbage chute. You don't want to see someone walking the steps for whatever reason and throwing garbage off your garbage chute, even though it's the same chute. But because that there's floors have their own rights. Same thing over here. You have an upstairs floor that have their own merpeset, their own a porch that goes across the different upstairs apartments. And from the upstairs porch, they go down to the courtyard. So they directly go from the porch to the courtyard by the steps. And from the chatzah, they go to the public domain. So if you live on the upstairs floor, you have a porch. You go on your porch, then you walk from your porch down to a duplex. Thank you, Danny. So you walk from your porch down the steps, and you go into the courtyard, and from the courtyard you walk out into your car and drive off. So you're in the public domain. So what are they saying? That again, this is where we see things come now. It's a little more applicable to our lives because courtyard inside a courtyard maybe we can't visualize. The upstairs courtyard is their own chatzir. That's their own group. If people are walking through the courtyard that is for the downstairs floor, and they're going up their steps to the upstairs porch that leads to the upstairs apartment, to the upstairs duplex apartment, that's breaking the Eiruv. So if they don't make one Eiruv of the upstairs and downstairs of the full complex, and the upstairs makes their own Eiruv Chatzeiros and downstairs makes their own Eiruv Chatzeiros, or the upstairs doesn't make an Eiruv Chatzeiros, and the downstairs does, then the fact that they're walking through the outside and going up the steps, they're breaking the Eiruv Chatzeiros. So again, it's such a case where you're walking through and walking up the steps and going onto a porch. Why do we say a porch? Because the porch creates the own chatzah, the private chatzah. The upstairs porch is for the upstairs people. Again, you wouldn't want to come outside and find out that your neighbor downstairs is hanging the laundry over your porch. That's for you live downstairs. We live upstairs. So therefore, and if you don't make one Eiruv Chatzeiros, so they're 2 separate entities, and their access through the courtyard out to the street breaks your level of your privacy, and the concern is still there. And therefore, if upstairs people don't make an Eiruv Chatzeiros, downstairs doesn't help. It breaks the Eiruv Chatzeiros. Is dinner kishtei chatzer zum miflim mezun v'amerpeset hikmei chatzer primi. The upstairs, the porch, the balcony that has this access for the upstairs people. That's a private courtyard that separates the two courtyards. Therefore, you have to make a single Eiruv Chatzeiros. If you don't, and the upstairs people don't make an Eiruv Chatzeiros, and the downstairs do, then we're back to square one. There's no Eiruv Chatzeiros. Let's see the footnote on that. This is based on Shulchan Aruch 375:1. This is true only. Okay, now he defines it. This is true only if the balcony is 10 tefachim higher than the yard. Okay, so Rebecca wanted to know 10 tefachim. Why do we talk about 10 tefachim? 10 tefachim, we learned in the laws of Shabbos before that within 10 tefachim is a single space. So if it's like just 2 steps up, and the upstairs porch is not, those 2 steps don't make up 10 tefachim, whatever, 36 inches. So then it's not 2 separate spaces. It's not 2 yards. So this is true only if the balcony is 10 tefachim higher than the yard. If not, they are considered as one courtyard, and no separate eruv can be made for each. And if you make one eruv, it has to be made and include everyone. Okay. We'll do one more law. Let's see. Unless anyone has any questions on the past 2 laws that we've learned. Okay. A house. Now, what about a house that has 2 apartments with a lobby through a lobby? So how easy to say it here? A house that has 2 apartments with a lobby through which you enter both apartments, and the apartments are occupied by 2 tenants. Okay. So bais sheyesh b'shtei diros, 2 apartments in a house. The hainu, meaning sheyesh prosdor, a lobby. Asher derech zeh nechnasim l'dir zu v'gam l'dir zu. So you walk. It's like it's not like a duplex that you have 2 separate entrances. There's that general lobby space, and you walk in, and you have to go to the right to one apartment, to the left another apartment. It's not one apartment that 2 people live, that one person lives. 2 separate people live in 2 separate houses. Is a certain feeling buys the prosder. Again, this is our classic apartment building. You cannot take things from your house to the lobby if there's no Eiruv Chatzeiros. So this is basically an apartment building. Minimal is 2 people. Anything more than 2 people it's not limited to 2 people. It's anything above 2 people with a single lobby. So you have the lobby is the chatzer, and your apartment is your private house. You can't carry things from your house to the prosder. And therefore, the only way, back to Rebecca's question last week, how could she carry in her apartment building, is because her apartment building is in the general Eiruv, and the Eiruv, the rabbis of the Eiruv have made the whole area of the Eiruv a single chatzer, not a whole bunch of courtyards, one within the next, because if they did that, it's a problem, like I said. And therefore, there's a single Eiruv Chatzeiros that includes everyone. But if you don't you don't live in the Eiruv, if you don't hold by the Eiruv, then your lobby makes it, you can't just take things from your house to the lobby. Even, let's say, now this gets a little bit more complicated. What about where people, this is a scenario sometimes where it's not like your roommates, your housemates that everyone pays separately for their own room. So you're renting a room in a house. So similarly, even if one apartment is divided into 2 rooms occupied by 2 tenants, right? 2 people live in 2 different rooms of the house. If you have mamish separate ownership or rent, even if one room has to go into the next room, let's have an apartment where the outer room is my place, I pay rent, and your room is in my outer room, go into your private bedroom, and you pay your own rent. Even if you're paying rent to the person in the outer house, possibly is also a question, then they have a shiloh, like Rebecca said, if he has access to your room, etc. But let's say there's 2 separate ownerships. I have an ownership of the inner room, you have the outer room. You can't carry between the rooms. It's like, again, it's 2 people in a single courtyard, unless you make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. Again, This is only a situation where you don't live in an Eruv. V'im shtei abatim oyadiros shayachim ish echad. What happens if, like I said, that really I own the house. One person owns it, but I'm renting you a bedroom. And he's renting it out to one person, to the next person. Like Rebecca, you said to me, you have access to that bedroom, whether it is the furniture you own, what have you. Then you have to look at Shulchan Aruch Shin Ayin, and the Chai Adam Klal Ayin Gimel, Siman Gimel v'Siman Dalet. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, so my son lived in an apartment. Every bedroom, well, let's put it this way. His bedroom was shared with a roommate, but everyone, I guess, everyone else had their own bedroom. They paid one bill, but each tenant shared in the bill. And then there was a common room, a bathroom, and a kitchen. So you're saying now they had a roof. So you're saying with the roof they're allowed to carry, but without the roof they couldn't go to the common room with stuff. So how would you carry your food for Shabbos to the table?
So let me explain. The scenario that we're talking about is, let's say, the inner room is a studio. It has its own fridge and its own eating space, and there's no joint. They don't live together. It means even if you have your own private room, but if you have a public kitchen that everyone uses, that kitchen, that is the Eiruv Chatzeiros. What is an Eiruv Chatzeiros? Eiruv Chatzeiros, the public kitchen is the Eiruv Chatzeiros. The fact that you have a public fridge and everyone has food in the fridge and everyone has food in the cupboard, that is the Eiruv Chatzeiros. That's the public. Everyone's sitting together and eating. But we're talking about a case where you have a studio in an apartment, and your studio is, you have your own fridge and your own little oven, your own little fireplace, and you eat and you sit and you eat in your own bedroom. That's different. Okay, so let's just see 14. Tfisas yad means having a hold on the apartment, means that the landlord stores articles in the apartment, like I said, furniture, that are either too heavy to move or forbidden to be moved on Shabbos because they are muksa. So that means that even during Shabbos he has access to your apartment. Okay, number 15 is having a hold on the apartment gives the occupant the halacha as a guest, which this is discussed in paragraph 14. Meaning, because the owner has access to your private studio, so therefore you're not really a rentee. You're just you're a guest, and therefore the guest you're a guest, so it's like one ownership. All right, we're going to stop over here, guys, and let's have any questions. Again, I want to recheck on Aaron your question about the public place. Okay, and not like the story we have of the Rebbe's father, that when they made the sukkah itself makes it a single place. The fact that everyone eats if you have a joint kitchen, I think that should be enough that you don't need an Eiruv Chatzeiros. But today what happens is sometimes is like everyone has their own space in the fridge, don't put your things in like it's very, very separate. I'm not sure if in such a situation where everyone has their own cupboard and everyone has if you have a lock on your cupboard, don't take my cereal, and everyone has their own space in the fridge and there's no joint dishes, everything is mamish separate. And even if you have a single kitchen, I'm not 100% sure. I have to check if that would still make it a communal space, because
what they did about food, totally, like some had their own food, but like definitely on Shabbos. So they're having a joint Shabbos together. Some people would buy the food, some people cook the food. They all pitched in.
That by definition is a joint, but I'm talking about in a case where it's mamish separate. Like my friend told me that they have a system in South Africa where when they have roommates, where they want to mamish divide the bills so much that, for instance, electricity and water and gas, the main utilities, get charged not communally but per use. They're able to basically have that your water runs on a credit card. Like you have to put in order to get like electricity or anything, you have to use like a smart card to access that. It turns on the system. So therefore, if someone takes a long shower and someone takes a short shower, or someone does wash all the time, so I don't have to pay for your overuse of water or vice versa. And I don't like that. We're not going to get into if that's a nice way of living, but if you live so divided, it's not so simple to know if the
I've never seen it in the United States like that.
I don't. Yeah, I don't. I think it's more. I think it's more common
And
today.
my son says that's ridiculous. We're not so cheap that.
I get that. I'm saying, but in such a case, I'm not sure if the fact that everyone could sit at the table is enough of a joint connection that's an Eiruv Chatzeiros. Yes, Rebecca.
Just related to what you were talking about earlier tonight. So I don't know if you're familiar with Riverdale at all. It's a community that's like in the Bronx, just above Manhattan, above Washington Heights. But basically, their setup is such that the Frum community is like one part of it is like on one side of the highway and part is on the other side of the highway. So the highway, like a 4-lane highway, I mean 2 lanes going north, 2 lanes going south, they go straight through the middle of the Frum community, and Riverdale has an Eruv that the like very Frum people hold by. So I'm wondering like how they were able to do that.
Well, the highway is a big shadow. You have to, again, Moshe Feinstein discusses highways and overpasses that break the area. Like in Los Angeles, I think the Los Angeles Eruv is basically the 10, the 10, the 405, and the I-5 kind of that in that space is the Eruv, because anything else, the I-5 or the 10 or the 405 will break the Eruv, so therefore they have to have a separate Eruv. So Santa Monica, I think it can be part of the Los Angeles Eruv because of the 405. And I think same thing also going into the valley. I think the I-5 or the 10 definitely breaks going further towards LAX. I think that's the Eruv of Los Angeles. It's the 10, 405, and the I-5. I think because of the different highways that break up. But definitely, or the one, I forget what it is, definitely the highway that crosses from the greater Los Angeles area into the valley is also problematic for the Eruv. All right, everyone. Laila Tov, thank you for joining.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Rabbi.